Happy New Year's! I can't believe it's 2023. It was really nice taking a little bit of a break during the holiday period, like those 2 weeks, but we're back. And I wanted my first video of the year just to do a little bit of reflecting on my previous year. I think in the past I've done like year in review type videos, whether it's like vlog types or like products that I love, but this year I feel like a big focus of mine was finding the time to read and like giving myself time to actually pursue that hobby more. It's honestly such a big part of my life in so many ways, so I thought the perfect video for starting off the year is going over all of the books that I read in 2022 and just doing a really quick review on them in case you are currently on the hunt for something to read. I'm gonna be looking at my phone because I have to refer to the books in my Goodreads. I just want to show you guys something really quickly. On Goodreads, they have these reading challenges, and I started my first reading challenge in 2015. I, for some reason, thought I could read 50 books. I read 2 books out of 50. 2017, I smartened up. I was like, okay, my goal is just to read 1 book a month. It seems so doable. I read 4 books that year. 2018, I was like, all right, 12 books, 1 book a month, let's go. 7 books that year. 2020, it was COVID. What else was I doing? My goal was 12 books. I read 1 book that year, apparently. I'm pretty sure that's not true. Maybe I just didn't track it, but the most important one is in 2022, I was like, I think I can read 20 books. I think in 2021, I started to really pick up reading again. And so I was like, I'm gonna up that 12 book goal. Let's try 20, see what happens. In 2022, I read 30 books, which isn't an obscene number. I'm sure there are book YouTubers or book TikTokers who read way more, but for me, that was a big accomplishment because it's not really about the number of books that I read. Like, that's not really what I'm happy about. What I'm happy about is that I actually found time, like gave myself the time to do this thing that I really enjoyed doing. And that's kind of been my goal over the last couple of years, is just learning to be okay with slowing down. I think this is like a common topic that I've been talking about a lot lately. And this goal being met, this little bar that measures how many books I read for the year, is one way that I have proven to myself that I'm getting better at that. And I love that. So this year, my book goal is 40 books. I'm gonna link my Goodreads in the description box if you guys wanna follow along, see how I'm doing with my challenge, keep each other accountable, see what books I read. But okay, let's go ahead and jump into all of the books that I read in 2022. All right, so I started the year off with How to Do the Work by Dr. Nicole LePera. This book was everything. I feel like in the last couple of years, I've really been getting this feeling that I've been reading just the right books at the perfect time. It's like I'm almost attracting the books that I should be reading at this period in my life. And How to Do the Work was definitely one of the books that made me feel that way. I feel like I can confidently say that everyone is dealing with some sort of trauma, unhealed trauma in their lives, and How to Do the Work is going to be the perfect book to help you start realizing some of that and figuring out how you can work through it. Definitely a book that I recommend everyone to read in their 20s, and it's an easy 5 out of 5. I love this book. Everyone needs to read it, and it's one that I'm gonna reread all throughout my life. The next book that I read was My Body by Emily Ratajkowski. I think that's how you pronounce her last name. This book honestly surprised me. I wasn't sure how I was gonna like it. I feel like books that I've read that were written by content creators in the past were sort of a hit or miss, but I was seeing all these raving reviews about this book and I just knew I had to give it a try. It was a really short read also, but honestly, I really enjoyed it. I will say I'm somebody who's pretty easy to please as far as entertainment goes, but what I really liked about this book was sort of the raw, honest, true voice that she has in this book. And because I am part of this industry, it was nice to get this sort of inner look into another creator or another entertainer's thoughts about her life, about her job, about her body, about being a woman. I gave this book a 4 out of 5, and I would recommend it if you're interested in the entertainment industry or sort of like society's standards of beauty for women. The next book was actually a book club read, and it was Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown. This was quite a different book than what I'm used to, but essentially it goes through every single like emotion that you can feel as a human being. And the goal of this book is just to improve people's vocabularies in how they're able to express themselves, because if you are able to communicate clearly what you are feeling, what your needs are, your emotions, it can actually help you build stronger connections with yourself and with those around you. I give this book a 5 out of 5 because I think the goal of the book is so key in today's society, but also because Brené Brown is an amazing writer and I love pretty much everything that she writes. The fourth book that I read was An Object of Beauty by Steve Martin. I did not know that Steve Martin wrote books, and I honestly didn't put 2 and 2 together when I found this book at a secondhand store. I rated this book a 4 out of 5. It follows the story of Lacey Yeager, who is working in the art industry in New York, and just sort of her journey as she grows in her career. I really liked it because it was really interesting to read about the art industry in New York, and I do think that he is a really good storyteller. So if you're interested in those topics, I would recommend this one. The fifth book was a recommendation from Summer, who has great recommendations, and I always love the books that she recommends. So I had no doubt that I would love it, but it's the book Hench by Natalie, Zina, Walschots. I gave this a 5 out of 5. It's such a short read and it was so entertaining, I could not put it down. It was one of the first fiction books that I read last year that I literally just consumed the entire book pretty much in one sitting. The story follows this girl named Anna, who's been bouncing from job to job but working essentially as a hench. In this dystopian setting, there are superheroes and there are supervillains, and they're actually super common, even more so than in Marvel or in the DC universe. So as an average person, you can actually choose to be the hench of a supervillain or, you know, work in the corporations of these superheroes. Anyways, it tells the story of Anna working as a temp hench for one of the biggest supervillains in the world, and sort of this crazy journey and adventure that she goes through in this career path. 10 out of 10 would recommend this book if you are into dystopian novels, and I honestly think that both men and women would really enjoy this book. Now I kind of jump into what I would call my hopeless romantic era of the year. It all started with Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. It was the first Colleen Hoover book that I ever read, and oh my god, it just hit me like a wrecking ball. Like, I was a train wreck after this book. Not so much in the sense that I was an emotional wreck, but I was just addicted to these little romantic novels and getting my romantic addiction hit from books. I finished Ugly Love on a plane ride to Mexico for my birthday, and then I instantly downloaded Verity as well because I read that the next day and finished it within a day as well. Ugly Love, I initially gave 4 out of 5 stars, but now I'm gonna actually change it to 3.5 out of 5 stars. It was not my favorite book by her, and honestly, while I was reading this book, there were moments where I was just literally shivering with anger at the stupidity and desperateness of the main character, and I don't like that, you know? Verity, however, solid 4 out of 5 for me. Yes, there were moments where I was cringing at the decisions and the mindset of the main character, but I do think that the plot twist was more fun in Verity, and overall I just liked the story a lot better. After Verity, I took a little break from Colleen Hoover and I dived into ACOTAR, the world of ACOTAR, which is the series A Court of Thorns and Roses. You would not believe the chokehold that these books had on me. I pretty much finished all 5 books. I think there are 5 books within the span of a week to 2 weeks. I've talked about them before in my previous video, so I'm not gonna dive too much into them, and I'm sure if you like reading fantasy or these romance novels, you already know about the series. But overall, I would give the series a 5 out of 5. Book number 4, which is A Court of Frost and Starlight, was the only book that I was like, meh, but every other book was absolutely amazing, and I would highly recommend all of them. After I completed the series, I did not want to dive into another series and just get completely wrecked like I did after ACOTAR, so I read a little single short novel which was called One Italian Summer by Rebecca Serle. I give this book like a 2 out of 5. I think the only redeeming thing about it was that it was based in Italy, and I love anything Italy related, but the story was very typical, very meh, and it was not encapturing for me at all. Continuing on with my short novels, I read Book Lovers by Emily Henry next. I actually really liked Book Lovers. I gave it a 4 out of 5. I would say that Emily Henry's books, like the ones that I've read at least, do have sort of a typical romantic storyline to them. But at least for me personally, when I pick up these short romantic novels, I am looking for a cute little story, and Emily Henry just writes these stories so well. She describes her characters beautifully. The settings are always great. The story arc is always fun. So I really have nothing bad to say about any of her books. Halfway through the year, I decided to give some more mystery thriller books a try, and the first one that I read was The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I actually really didn't like this book that much. I gave it a 3 out of 5. Yeah, the story was pretty interesting all throughout, but I think at the end, it wrapped things up in sort of an unsatisfying way for me. And so for me personally, this was not my favorite book by him and not a thriller or mystery that I really recommend to people. However, the only cool thing about it is if you read The Silent Patient and then read his other book, which I read later on, The Maidens, they do have sort of a connection that bridges the two stories a little bit, which I thought was really interesting. So for that reason alone, I thought it was worth reading The Silent Patient, but just as a standalone thriller mystery, wasn't my favorite, and it did not deserve a recommendation from me, honestly. Moving on, the next book that I read was another sort of like TikTok impulse buy, and this was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This book is the definition of a slow burn. So if you do not like these types of stories which build and build and build and build and build and seem everlasting, I probably wouldn't recommend this book. But I personally actually really enjoyed this book. I've had other slow burn books that I really did not enjoy, but the story of Addie LaRue actually really captured me, and I like that we were going through these like pieces of history throughout her story and her life. So although it was a slow burn, I still really enjoyed my whole reading process of this book. I would say that I don't think everyone will like it, but if you're into mythological stories, a little bit of romance, some dark humor, and a slow burn, I think that you will enjoy this book just like I did. All right, back to Colleen Hoover. I read Layla by Colleen Hoover next, and I don't know whether it's because I read Verity first or not, but I do think I liked Verity better, although Layla also got a 4 out of 5s on my Goodreads because it was another book that just hit the mark for me. I feel like her books do really well at satisfying the reader in what they are looking for. So most of them are sort of these like satisfying love stories, with a few exceptions being Verity and Layla that have sort of a thriller spooky side to them as well. I did know that Layla was going to be kind of spooky going into it, so for that reason it was a really satisfying story for me to read because I was looking for that sort of spooky love vibe, and she gave me exactly that. I did read It Ends With Us after Layla though, and I will say It Ends With Us, like I totally understand why this book blew up so much because it definitely is my favorite book by Colleen Hoover. The story is just so deep and there's so many pieces to it, and I just feel like it is her best written piece yet, where you're getting the love story but you're also sort of held at this suspense all throughout the story at the perfect pace, and then the ending was also super satisfying as well. It Ends With Us got a 5 out of 5 for me, and I really recommend it. Another unexpected book that I read this year that I absolutely loved was Maybe You Should Talk to Somebody by Lori Gottlieb. This was a recommendation from my friend Rainbow, and it was so good. It essentially tells a story about a woman who is a therapist who starts going through some life things and needs to go see a therapist herself. Initially, when I was told about this book, I thought that it was going to be this like fun story, but you actually learn so many lessons that you would learn in like a self-help book, for example, all throughout this book, because you're literally going through her psychology of healing and of learning and of growth, but you're getting all of her therapy sessions all wrapped up in one book, along with her own psychological evaluation of everything that's going on as a therapist. I would recommend this book to anybody. It's a 5 out of 5 for me, and it's one of those rare storybooks that I think that I would actually read again just because of how interesting the story was, how lovable the character was, but also how many lessons that you learn along the way. The next book that I read was Normal People by Sally Rooney. I can understand why this book grew such a cult following, but personally, I didn't love it that much. I give this book a 3.5 out of 5. I think that the way that it was written almost reminds me of like A Catcher in the Rye, and I personally didn't love the writing style that much. However, I did like sort of the real raw insights that you got from the characters of the book, and I did really enjoy the story. I just personally wasn't really used to her writing style, and I found that for that reason it was a little hard for me to finish the book. After Normal People is when I read The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. This is the book that I mentioned that has a connection with The Silent Patient because they're in the same world and they're written by the same author. I enjoyed this book infinitely more than I enjoyed Silent Patient, and I would give this book probably a 4 out of 5. Again, it is a thriller mystery type of book, but it does have this mythological aspect to it as well, talking a little bit about Greek mythology, I believe. So maybe it's just mythological books or like mythologically themed books that I really love, because that makes a lot of sense. That was a topic that I really enjoyed learning about as a kid. But to me personally, I just think that the ending of this book feels a lot more wrapped up, done well, and satisfying than The Silent Patient, and just felt a little less predictable, where I felt like, yes, The Silent Patient was your classic sort of thriller mystery story arc, but it felt way too predictable to me. I then finished the book Burnout by Emily Nagoski. This was actually a book that I started in 2022 and I just could not finish it for some reason. So I finally decided to pick it back up off the shelf, dust it off, and finish it. I'm glad that I did that though at this time, because I feel like it was a lot easier for me to consume this year than it was last year. She essentially talks about the science behind burnouts and how you can prevent them by completing the stress cycle. And honestly, I give it a 5 out of 5 because her writing style is really concise and really easy to read, but still feels really like relatable and colloquial. And then the idea behind the book, I seriously believe as well. And it's something that I try to apply to my life week after week now. So if you're somebody who is struggling with stress or anxiety in your life and sort of teetering and sort of balancing on this line of trying not to burn out, but also trying to be really productive, I would definitely give this book a read. In 2022, I also read Ghosts by Dolly Alderton. I loved this book so much, and I will definitely be reading way more Dolly Alderton in the future. Her writing makes you feel like you're talking to your best friend, and I absolutely loved that. This book was also very raw, very real, and it deep dives into the thoughts of a woman and her experience dating and navigating the dating world in her 30s. It does also talk a little bit about the themes friendship and family, and the best way that I can describe it is it's like a coming of age story, but like a coming of mid-age story. I feel like this is a really relatable story to anybody who is in their late 20s or in their early 30s, and it was totally a 5 out of 5 read for me. After that, I went back to Colleen Hoover and I read Reminders of Him. I really enjoyed this story because it felt really different than her other books. Yes, all of her books talk about this theme of trauma, but I feel like this one was even more of a twist to her typical trauma-filled love stories. But overall, this was like a 4 out of 5 read for me. And if you're in your Colleen Hoover phase like I was last year, I would definitely recommend reading this one. The next book that I read was The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Dave. I actually really enjoyed reading this book. It's another sort of thriller mystery book, and although the story felt a little bit typical, I actually had so much fun reading this book, so it still got a 4 out of 5 stars for me. I like that this book not only incorporates a romantic story and relationship, but it also touches on the themes of family and being a stepmother or stepfather. This isn't going to be like your Agatha Christie or Stephen King or some sort of crazy thriller, mystery, dark, deep thing, but if you do like a light thriller mystery novel, I really enjoyed this one and I would actually recommend it. The next book is another 5 out of 5 read for me. It is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I'm so late to the game with reading this book, but it was so worth it and I'm so glad I finally got around to it. Again, it's that mythological aspect to me that is so fun and so interesting, but this book has the themes of love, friendship, family, expectations, reputations, and then of course that Greek mythology storytelling. This is one of those books that I would recommend to you no matter who you are, because the story was just so beautifully written and it had such a lovely theme and message behind it. The last Colleen Hoover book that I read last year was It Starts With Us, which is the sequel to It Ends With Us. So it actually picks up right where It Ends With Us leaves off. Honestly, I think as a story, It Ends With Us trumps It Starts With Us by so much. So if you've read the first book, I know you're gonna want to read the second book because that's how much she makes you love these characters. Also by Emily Henry, I read The People We Meet on Vacation, which was another super fun little love story. Again, the storyline feels typical, but Emily Henry's writing is so lovely that I would still definitely recommend this book because it was such a enjoyment book for me. It satisfies exactly what you are looking for when you pick up these books, and the storytelling is beautiful, so 4 out of 5. I definitely recommend it if you are into these short romantic novels. The theme of this one is definitely that trope of like friend zones and unrequited love. And then it has this lovely aspect of travel as well, which who doesn't love? The second last book that I read last year was Bones and All by Camille DeAngelis. I read this book because I was actually invited to the movie premiere of Bones and All the movie, and I'm super glad that I read it because it was actually so good. This is supposed to be a YA novel, but it does have some pretty dark themes to it, aka cannibalism. But she talks about it in such a way where it doesn't feel like this scary Hannibal Lecter sort of thing, because the main character of the book is so young and you follow her story of going from a child to a young adult, I guess. It sort of almost dampens the severity of the topic of cannibalism. Overall, I would describe it as a coming-of-age story that also kind of talks about the themes of being a woman in today's society and how you navigate that. 4 out of 5 book for me. I really enjoyed it. And if you're looking for a short, fun read, I think this one is totally worth picking up. All right, book number 30. Not a fun, interesting love story or anything like that. The last book that I read last year was Jab, 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 Right Hook by Gary Vaynerchuk. This was more of a career read for me. It was something that I picked up for work, and I'm really glad that I did. Although the ideas of this book are a little outdated now, it talks about social media in a slightly outdated way. It talks about Facebook ads and like different, I guess, digital media formats in an outdated way. I think that the main point of the book still is very applicable to anyone who is looking to be in the field of marketing. I'd probably give this book like a 4 out of 5. I think the ideas are great, but it does suck that this didn't last through the tests of time. But it is really hard to in this category of books because the industry is constantly changing and technology is constantly improving. So it is quite impressive that the main idea and methodology of the book still stands, even though so much of the technicalities are now outdated. All right, those are all of the books that I read in 2022. If you have read any of the same books that I did last year, let me know in the comments down below. And if you haven't, I hope you were able to find a few recommendations that you want to read for 2023. I will be updating you guys all throughout the year of how my reading challenge for 2023 is going and whether I'm getting close to that 40 book mark. But if you guys want to follow along even when I'm not online, go and check out my Goodreads account. It has been my favorite way to keep track of all the books that I'm reading and all the books that I want to read. So you can find all of that in my Goodreads profile. I do often post mini reviews and excerpts on my Instagram as well, so all my social links will be in the description box below if you want to reach me in other ways. But I think that is everything. I hope you guys are having an amazing day wherever you are in the world, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!